I don't know about you, but recently my feeds have been jammed up with camera rumors, leaks, and everything about the latest and greatest cameras that are going to be coming out over the next few months. And I think it's easy to get swept up in all this hysteria and think that you need all this new tech to make great work. But, deep down, we all know that that isn't true. So with that in mind, I'm going to look at what I think is probably the best and cheapest full frame camera that you can get right now. So if you buy it used, you can pick this camera up for around £500 or 600 US dollars. And the footage that you can get from this camera still stacks up next to cameras that are 10 times its price. So if you're on a budget, this could be your smartest play. I bought this camera back in 2020. I got it as a simple B cam for my client work, but it was soon obvious that this little thing was packing way more than most people expected, myself included.
Most people can afford.
It had 10-bit 4K recording, it could capture 4K at 60 frames per second and had some great anamorphic features, amazing image quality, and the cherry on top was that this thing could also shoot RAW over HDMI.
Be late for your appointment.
If you haven't guessed it yet, then this camera is the original Lumix S5 Mark I. Even though I've upgraded my kit many times since buying this camera, still been bringing this thing out on client shoots as recent as last month. And that's because it's still a phenomenal little powerhouse. The image from this thing still stacks up, and I found it cuts beautifully even with my higher end RED Komodo. Whenever someone asks me for a cheap full frame recommendation, I always suggest the Lumix S5, especially as you can pick this camera up for incredibly cheap on the used market. I've seen this camera go for as little as $500, which is insane. Generally, they tend to bounce between $600 and $750, although in recent months it does seem that tariffs have increased prices on the used market in the US. This is just incredible value for money for the image that you can get out of this camera. Like when you compare it to a used A7S Mark III, which I don't think is superior in image quality, that camera is still selling used for between $2,500 and $3,000 US. I still think that the Lumix S5 has one of the nicest images across the previous Lumix lineup. The S1H would be my pick overall, but we're looking at affordability here, so even used, that camera is more than twice the cost of the original Lumix S5. Like the S1H though, we see the sensor in the Lumix S5 Mark II, the original S1, and even in modern cinema cameras like the Pixar 6K. So it has staying power, and that's because it's a great 6K sensor. It has fantastic dynamic range, especially in the highlights. This S5 is advertised to have around, I think, 14 stops of dynamic range, but more importantly, it just has this beautiful highlight roll off, and that's something that I was really drawn to and noticed immediately after using this camera. Like, I remember taking this camera out on its first proper shoot and being absolutely blown away by the organic quality of the image. It was such a shift from the previous generations of Lumix cameras that I was using. So I was sort of coming from the GH5 at the time, and that thing had a pretty harsh clipping behavior, whereas this, the S5, just had this beautiful organic roll-off. I think about the only criticism you could level at this camera is that it lacks an optical low-pass filter. So that's just something that sort of smooths over the high frequencies and gives you this sort of slightly softer looking image, and that's a good thing. That's something that we want in video. We don't want everything to be too crunchy and sharp. So this camera does have that kind of sharp mirrorless quality to it, but I did quickly figure out how to mitigate this through lens choice, through filtration, and of course through color grading. In fact, one of my favourite projects I've made to date is a completely grungy and dirty short documentary, which I shot on the Lumix S5 and the DZO film Vespids. Vlog has always been a dream to grade, and the 10-bit files you get from this thing have always been super easy to grade and push around with absolutely minimal noise. The camera gives you a really nice thick 10-bit 422 recording in H.264 that goes up to 30 frames a second, and then if you go to 4K 60 you record in a 420 file 10-bit. So plenty of information to be working around for most professional projects. In terms of low light, again, this camera was no slouch. It has a dual native ISO system, so low base of 640 ISO and a high base of 4000. And it just produces really clean images, allowing you to capture in low light environments. And from what I've seen from various comparison videos that I've seen over the years, it's even given cameras like the Sony a7S Mark III and the FX3 a run for its money in terms of its low light capabilities. So although the next gen of cameras, the Lumix S5 Mark II brought loads of quality of life upgrades with like amazing autofocus, open gate recording and a better IBIS system, it did seem to come with a bit of a downgrade or sacrifice in image quality, something that lots of people have commented on over the years. That camera was just a little bit noisier, it felt a little bit more processed, the image was sort of more digitally sharpened. And it just meant that over the years, when I didn't need stuff like autofocus and all the other quality of life stuff, I actually found myself going back to the original S5. I brought it out of retirement. Especially when, shooting 2 free camera interview setups with my larger cinema cameras, so like with the RED Komodo or the Panasonic EVA 1. This is the camera that I use next to those larger cinema cameras. And you can see here on these sort of 2 camera interview setups that the thing just goes toe to toe with cameras like the Komodo. And it's a pretty simple process to get the two looking pretty similar in the grade. Like, just have a guess now which one you think is the Lumix and which one you think is the Komodo. My technique here when using it next to the Komodo is that I actually just stick the Lumix in Super 35 mode, and that really tames some of the digital sharpness of the sensor. And also just using Super 35 lenses. So when I'm doing 2 camera shoots with these cameras, I tend to use something like the Laowa Super 35 Rangers, and that just helps get a consistent look across these 2 very different cameras. This camera's not just about the fantastic image quality, it came with some fantastic features which were kind of surprising and impressive for a camera of this size and price at the time. It has obviously Lumix's industry-leading IBIS, which still holds up even against cameras like the FX3. Doesn't just give you vanilla IBIS, it also gives you anamorphic IBIS modes, it gives you a bunch of additional electronic stabilization modes, so it just takes things even further than most other cameras. The camera also has dual SD cards for extended recording time or backup recording functionality, and obviously the thing just absolutely never overheats. Although it doesn't have open gate functionality, it does have some awesome anamorphic features, including various APS-C anamorphic modes, allowing up to 60 frames a second. It has the mentioned anamorphic IBIS and the ability to de-squeeze your image internally, which a lot of modern cameras still haven't caught up with. And on top of all of this stuff, the camera can also output a raw signal over HDMI to either an Atomos recorder or a Blackmagic recorder. It gives you a pretty impressive 5.9K raw output up to 30 frames a second, or a 4K 60 frames a second with an APS-C crop, and it even gives you a 3.5K anamorphic mode as well. So, this camera gives you a lot. Okay, so the most obvious here is just the autofocus system. It predates the current phase detect autofocus system that we see in the modern Lumix lineup. I believe it's contrast based, so you have to be very patient with it if you want to work with the autofocus system in video. So yes, while it does pale in comparison to the modern autofocus systems, if you're like me, then you tend to shoot on manual lenses anyway, then something like this isn't going to be a huge issue, especially, if you're on a budget and you're willing to overlook something like this. The DJI Focus Pro is an option if you want to use it with this. I've used it with this camera and it works great, especially if you're using it with manual cine lenses. Another thing a lot of people wanted to grumble about when this camera came out is that it has a fairly significant crop when you want to shoot in 60 frames in 4K. So it goes into an APS-C crop, which I guess is like 1.4, 1.5 times. Honestly, it just never really bothered me. I understand for some people it's a deal breaker, but for me it never was. I guess the micro HDMI port is a bit of a frustrating piece of I/O on this camera. Again, honestly, didn't really cause me any issues, but I understand some people really hate this. I guess one of the other big limitations with this camera is that it does have 30-minute record limits with video. You can shoot unlimited in 8-bit if you're happy to do that. But otherwise, it's not really caused me huge issues over the years, to be honest. It's just a limitation I've been aware with and then worked around it. I've taken it out on quite big budget shoots this year to shoot interviews, and it never caused any issues. We just had someone re-trigger the record when the interviewer was asking a question or something like that. And again, even when I started out recording YouTube videos and I was doing my long, rambly talking head recordings, I used the Lumix S5 and it was absolutely fine. I just, made sure I was conscious of when I was hitting that 30 minutes and re-triggered record. Camera tech has generally plateaued, I think, in the last 5 years, and most updates with new cameras are iterative, I think. Although we as tech-conscious filmmakers may notice the small image upgrades and updates with new cameras, I promise you that, most of the audience, and more importantly, probably most of your clients, are not going to notice the incremental differences between a camera like this and a camera like, the S1 Mark II. If you know how to light, if you're doing the job properly, if you know composition, those things are going to help level up your images far more than the incremental updates between a camera like this and a more expensive camera. You could pair it with some cheap vintage lenses or a cheap used 24-70, get some cheap wireless mics, pick up some cheap lights, portable tripods, and you'd already have yourself a very competent filmmaking kit that will cover you in most professional situations, and it will give you a really good return on quite a modest investment. Save money from your budget buying a camera like this, then you're more likely to have money left over to invest maybe in some budget cinema lenses, maybe like the DZO Film Vespids or the new Typox. So yes, that's why I think the Lumix S5 still absolutely slaps. It's one of the cheapest and most competent full frame cameras that you can buy on the used market right now. So if you are on a super tight budget and you're looking for your first full frame camera, I think the Lumix S5 is a really strong option. That's it. Thanks for watching. I'm Ed Prosser. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Let me know what you think about this camera. Are you still using it? Are you thinking of getting one? If you've got any questions about it, just drop it in the comments down below. But yeah, I'll catch you in the next one. See ya.